Hi, everyone. I'm really excited today to get to be joined by friend of mine and perhaps one of my favorite teachers of all time, Kiki Yablon. And we're going to talk today about sort of naturally occurring reinforcers, food, potentially some of the problems with food. When do you use these things? Why? What would even make it a reinforcer? And kind of just see where the conversation goes. So, um, Kiki,
Yes,
let's maybe
Christy.
start with, I think, the most basic part here, which is what is a reinforcer, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, and I think we could also talk about what a naturally occurring reinforcer is because that definition might surprise people
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So a reinforcer is uh, the outcome of a behavior. It's something that happens because the behavior happened, or that seems to happen because the behavior happened, usually close to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the effect of making that behavior more likely to occur in the future under similar circumstances.
Okay. So just because you give your dog a treat, it doesn't necessarily mean it is a reinforcer in that moment.
Yes, although in recent years, I've gotten a lot less like persnickety about that because in behavior analysis,
Mm-hmm.
reinforcement is used to describe both
The act.
effect
Uh-huh.
and the procedure
Okay.
where you hope that the thing you're doing is going to be a
Reducing.
behavior increaser. So I feel like we put people in this impossible position where it's like, well, it's not we're not talking about rewards because rewards don't necessarily increase behavior, but also they can't call a reinforcer because we don't know yet what the effect on
Right.
behavior is. Like, Jesus, like,
Right.
let's,
Yes. Yes. I,
yeah.
I would
So,
just call it a reinforcer, but I think the more I've learned, paid attention to, is this doing over time what I think it's doing? And if it's not,
yeah,
then I'm going to revisit not really my language, but my
yeah.
procedure.
Yeah, where we get into trouble is where we say, I provided the reinforcers and the behavior didn't increase. And so, therefore, reinforcement doesn't work. Positive reinforcement didn't work for my dog. This is not something that can be reinforced.
Right.
All the branches that we could go out from there. That's where it becomes problematic and why people do get persnickety about remembering that reinforcement is something that increases a behavior.
Okay. So what makes something a naturally occurring reinforcer?
Yeah. So again, like any other words, words exist in the world and have as many meanings as there are people. But the definition in behavior analysis is that it's the reinforcer that's going to maintain a behavior when training is over. Which, when is training ever over? But but it's the reward that is likely to maintain the behavior, the reinforcer that's likely to maintain the behavior outside of the training setting in the natural setting, which is, the setting where you actually need the behavior.
Okay. So can food be a naturally occurring reinforcer?
Absolutely. So food is a naturally occurring reinforcer for instance, eating, for eating behavior, for sitting down at the table, but it also can be a naturally occurring reinforcer if the person you live with is likely to give you food for doing a certain behavior. So natural here doesn't necessarily mean natural in the like call of the wild sense of
Right.
natural, like, you know, the law of tooth and fang or whatever it was, like, um, it doesn't necessarily mean like species typical uh, or any of those other meanings of nature.
Okay.
So,
What?
but
Go ahead.
yeah, like a lot of the rewards, even that dogs produce by doing their own behavior, aren't necessarily like sort of species typical. Like, you know,
Because
so
of where they live now.
yeah, because they live in because they're
We're so
permanent. They're permanent foreign exchange students who never
Yes.
learn the language. So,
So what is sort of on the opposite end of naturally occurring reinforcers?
that would be the opposite term is a contrived reinforcer, which means a reinforcer that is intentionally provided to teach someone something.
Okay. Um, can you maybe give an example? Well, I guess what goes into your mind when considering what reinforcer to use?
Um, so I have an article that's like a blog on my website that's fairly popular about it's called like when can I stop using treats? Um, and my answer to that is it depends on what there is available to take over for treats, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are some behaviors that I will probably reinforce for treats with treats forever because there's no other good reason that I can give a dog for continuing to do those things, like sitting still to get poked in the ass by a needle or, you know,
The actual outcome of standing still is
yeah.
pretty awful.
Yeah, like having someone stick a thermometer
Yep.
in your rear end
Why
or,
would you do that?
yeah. Um, and then there are other behaviors where there are plenty of things, to take over, and I think that this gets into a really interesting, like, rabbit hole down the side, which is when we talk about conditioned reinforcers, which are reinforcers that have to be learned, that you don't come out of the womb, or like at some period in your development, you don't just find these reinforcing without any prior learning.
Mhm.
But there are lots of things that are conditioned reinforcers. And generally, we say conditioned reinforcers get their power from being paired with some other
Mhm.
reinforcer.
Yep. Mhm.
But I think the lines get a little bit wiggly because there are a lot of things that we like. Food is supposed to be a primary reinforcer, like unlearned. But
Mhm.
there are lots of foods that we end up learning
Sure.
to like, even though we're not starving
Right.
enough to like make something that's horrible to like want to choke down,
Right. Right.
grass or something.
Right.
Um, so there's even learning involved sometimes in like why do people like alcohol? Like alcohol tastes terrible, and it, like for me it doesn't even feel good to like be drunk. Like I think, I'm sure that's part of it, but like, why do we
Right.
or why do people like certain types of alcohol that taste absolutely horrible or why
Presumably
do
mixed it with something that tastes decent, but that is not always true.
yeah, or like sea urchin or who knows.
Sure.
Like there are things that we learn to like
Yep.
because it's like cool to like them
Yep.
or whatever. Um or because once we do taste them, even though the textures may be off-putting at first, there is we learn about some other aspect of it that's reinforcing. So I think about that all the time with dogs with like getting brushed, where it's like having a human do like run a stick with bristles on it down your back is like a lot of dogs will kind of move away from that initially. But then when they learn that it feels good, then you don't need a treat for brushing.
So what you're kind of describing here is that sometimes you're going to use the treat, the contrived reinforcer there so that they can contact or learn about some other reinforcer that's going to show up in that
Yes.
setting.
Yep. If they can learn to do the behavior that results in the what we want to be the naturally occurring reinforcer
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, this happens to us in school. Like we learn stuff for grades, or teacher approval or whatever, and maybe like don't get a chance to contact the naturally occurring reinforcer until years later,
Mhm.
like math, you know, or statistics or whatever, like,
Help me. What were the naturally occurring reinforcers for statistics?
right?
Actually,
Oh, you get into grad school.
I don't think I got there.
You get, you have your statistics. This is when I applied for my behavior analysis grad school in like, what was it, 2018 or something. They were like, "When you have to have, an introductory statistics course on your transcript." And I was like, "Yep, 1989."
Yes.
I remember all of it.
I knew this would come in handy.
Yeah. Right. But like, and then the real naturally occurring reinforcer obviously is like if you do some research of you need to do statistics and
Correct.
you've got the skills, or
Correct.
then you can contact the publication or
Right.
whatever. But we learn stuff as humans, we learn stuff all the time for contrived reinforcers. And good teachers will try to put you in contact with the things that are going to maintain that behavior in the long run. Like you learn to do subtraction, and now you can go to the grocery store and get a candy bar and get the right change, and you know, or whatever. So
So, when you're thinking about using a contrived reinforcer versus, and I guess versus is maybe not even totally fair because over the course of a program, it's probably and is probably potentially the word that would go there is that um, what may start with contrived is going to very quickly move to um, the maintaining reinforcer. Um,
sometimes, yeah, sometimes not.
no.
Sometimes the naturally occurring reinforcers are not. How do I put this? Like they're not that easily contacted by dogs.
Mhm.
Um,
Do you have an example that comes to mind?
like the dream would be that if your dog learns to approach calmly,
Mhm.
without jumping and scrabbling and
Mhm.
all of that stuff, that they could meet other dogs.
Mhm.
But in reality, it can be hard to arrange situations where that's going to be like there's going to be a good outcome for that, or they get to practice.
Mhm.
So it can be hard to, if you're a trainer and you don't have a setup with helper dogs and a safe, you know, facility and things like that, it may be hard to actually get the dog to what should be a naturally occurring reinforcer for polite approach to other dogs.
And I think you hit on something that I think answers one of the questions that someone in the Substack community asked, which was if you wanted to use like if you have a dog that does not fluently eat food in a bunch of conditions and you wanted to use um, other reinforcers in the environment, many of which would be naturally occurring reinforcers for those behaviors, how would you actually go about doing that? And I think
Yeah.
the reason it just came up, this popped up right here is because you just talked about arranging conditions, which, um,
Yeah. So before you can use a
hard.
skill, before you can use a skill, you have to have the skill.
Right.
You have to have learned the skill. So one of the beautiful things about behavior is that once you have a behavior and you're using it for one thing, you can learn to use it to do lots of other things. So a lot of those behaviors we teach with contrived reinforcers. And if people get a chance, or if you attended Clicker Expo Live last year, the online one, Maya Owen did a fabulous presentation about teaching sheep herding without sheep.
Okay.
She taught, and this is something that's often said, that you can't do it, right? And you have to have the sheep there because those are the reinforcers that the dog really wants. And a lot of sheep herding, this is my interpretation of her presentation. I don't know shit about sheep herding, but is taught by like sort of subtraction. Like you have this dog, this novice dog around sheep, and if they do the wrong thing, you block them, you put your stick in their way or whatever. And so you subtract behavior. And what she did was teach the behaviors that she wanted with food, and then transition to animals. So you can and this also comes. I want to give credit everywhere. When I was discussing this topic with Hannah Brannigan, we were talking about one thing that she said that stuck with me was the trick is to figure out how to use the contrived or how to use the naturally occurring reinforcer without withholding, right? Without, and that's kind of seems related to me, like without subtracting, without withholding, like without basically setting them up so that they really want it, but they can't get it unless they do what you want. And one way that you can do that is to teach the skills with contrived reinforcement until they are robust, right? They're well practiced, they're on cue, they're generalized to different situations, maybe gradual situations in that beautiful way that Ken Ramirez does. Generalization where like every single session, like there's a little bit of novelty,
something different.
It's not disruptive, but it's just like you get immune to,
these things don't matter.
Yeah. Or I think, yeah. And then you can teach the animal, hey, this thing you know how to do for these reinforcers, you can also do it for these reinforcers. And you can combine that, of course, with, techniques like shaping or stimulus fading or things that make it not an abrupt transition, but that, like if you want, like say you've taught your dog to do the behavior of going to greet, somebody in a calm way, maybe you don't start that 20 feet away from the person now, the stranger that they want to greet. You start it. So they have to be calm for a short amount of time, and then they get to move 2 feet to the person. Or if being closer is really hard, then maybe you start further away. So those are all sort of things to consider, I think, when you're transitioning from skills that you've taught with contrived reinforcers, and then you're introducing the animal to new things that they can get by doing that.
Do you ever run the risk of a dog going, in this situation, the outcome that my behavior has produced has been food. What the heck? Where's my food?
Yeah. So I've wavered over what to call that, as I think you know. I originally referred to it as a milk Pepsi moment. And then I ran across Sarah Stremming's use of milk as an aversive thing. And actually, I think the two concepts are kind of related, but I didn't want people to think I stole milk. So I changed it to calling it the orange juice Pepsi moment, where you've been doing this behavior, and this behavior gets you orange juice, and then one day someone gives you let's say it's in an opaque vessel, like, and you take a sip expecting orange juice, and you get Pepsi.
And normally you like Pepsi.
And even though you like Pepsi, that is likely to be an aversive experience. So one way that you can kind of navigate that moment is to have a moment where they have a time where they overlap. Now, this is where orange juice Pepsi does not work as well as milk and Pepsi. So for you old people, who remember Laverne and Shirley, the show Laverne and Shirley. Laverne loved milk and Pepsi together. And I actually used to like, I learned that from the show when I was little, and I
That
liked milk and
sounds
Pepsi.
disgusting.
It's kind of like, I mean, it's essentially
A
like a
float,
melted
kinda?
ice cream float.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, but you could combine the two
Okay.
reinforcers. So practically speaking, what that might look like I have a video of teaching a dog to ring a bell
Mhm.
to get let outside.
Mhm.
And I've taught the bell ringing skill with
Mhm.
treats, but
Mhm.
that's not what, like, I don't want the dog to ring the bell for treats. I want the dog to ring the
Mhm.
bell to get let outside.
Mhm.
So I need to teach the dog that now when you ring the bell, there's a new consequence that happens. So one thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm working at a time where the dog usually wants to go outside.
Mhm.
And so I'm transitioning in the video to the dog rings the bell, and I had started on the floor, so I also had to fade myself like up off the floor and all of those things that might be cueing ringing the bell for
Right.
food. And the bell is near the door now.
Mhm.
And so the first time the dog rings the bell, and I open the door, and the dog just looks at me like, "What?" And I throw a treat outside.
Yep.
Um, so I'm combining the two reinforcers.
Mhm.
Here's your contrived reinforcer, but it's outside.
Mhm.
And then the dog comes back in, and the second time they ring the bell and I just open the door, then the dog like kind of pauses for a minute and then is like spring and like
Mhm.
runs outside.
Mhm.
So that's an example of sort of doing that. Another example is during loose leash walking
Mhm.
is where I don't so it depends on what part of loose leash walking you're teaching, but generally speaking, for most of the walk, I don't want the dog like walking next to me, craning its neck to like look at me. I want them to be walking uh, at a pace that keeps the leash loose.
Right.
Um, it's okay if they're what I call mind sweeping, like whoop, just knock stuff over. If they're like going cross and they're sniffing, as long as they're not pulling me.
Yep.
Um, and so but I often get walking near me by reinforcing attention. So how do I get from walking next to me, staring at me for food to walking with their head forward or sniffing? Um, and one way that I start to do that is I start to deliver the treat for looking at me out in the grass. So I throw it away from me. And then when the dog looks up, they're a little further away from me, and if we walk forward together, I can start reinforcing for head forward, and the treat goes out in the grass. So it's not about like returning to me and coming in front of me and all of that stuff. So those would
Yes.
be a couple of examples.
Okay, that's awesome. It's also,
What about you?
I think it's also a generally useful. There's a bunch of things that come to mind, but I did want to point
Yeah.
out because you just gave a quick little thing that I think is useful for so many people that I've talked to who have said, "Yeah, but when I capture attention, I get a dog who's just like glued to me, and this seems like a crappy way to walk." And I agree, that does seem like a crappy way to
Yeah.
walk. And I think sometimes that advice, like, I think it is such an important foundation, and we have to pay attention to the behavior that we're seeing from our dog, right? Like, if we want more behavior where they can actually be out enjoying the walk, then we might need to transition a little bit where our reinforcers are showing up and what we are reinforcing.
Yep. And
Lest we
then
have
when you can kind of follow along or walk sniffily on a loose leash for X amount of duration, you're probably going to find your own reinforcers in the grass. And then I might want you to check in with me before we move along together.
right.
Um, so for that, I might use initially food, but later I've usually taught a cue that means like, let's walk.
Mhm.
And that becomes the reinforcer. And then I've given this presentation twice about this subject, and there's a video from you that I used there that you were nice enough to let me use that is about some naturally occurring reinforcers that are a little bit hard to pin down. So you were looking at wanting Otis to relax if you were before Ford was born,
Mhm.
if you were standing up and dancing around
Mhm.
with Ford, because dancing around for Otis had previously been a cue to get up and play with a toy.
Yep.
That was in your hand, which would be unfortunate if he mistook your baby for that toy.
Correct.
Um, and so we looked for the naturally occurring, or I don't think I helped you. I think you did this by yourself. Sorry. Uh, look for the naturally occurring reinforcers for resting on the couch. What are those? Right? They're probably physiological, right?
They're there.
But it's an important thing is that reinforcers don't only come from us, right? Reinforcement is a process that's just happening all day. We behave, the environment gives us feedback, we behave based on that feedback, or that feedback is our cue for the next behavior. That behavior gets feedback, and that there's this constant loop where our behavior is adjusting to um, our conditions. So the next time around, we're more likely to do this or that or whatever, right? So if I always use this example, I'm in this chair and I have my right leg crossed over my left, my back is hurting. I will uncross my legs and cross them the other way. And there is a reinforcer there in the removal of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
It's just if I want to write something down, there's a pen here. I'm going to probably look in that spot again for a pen next time. If I found one here this time, it's like this. We don't have to be aware that it's happening.
Yes.
Yeah. So if an animal is resting on the couch and they do that frequently under certain conditions, we can assume there is some reinforcement there. There's some outcome of that doing that behavior that is making it likely to happen again next time. So you looked for where that behavior was already happening and being reinforced, and that's when you started to introduce in small steps your behavior of dancing around,
Mm-hmm.
holding a sack of flour.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I tried to sneak my cue in, basically.
yeah,
The new cue
yep.
in.
You kind of faded it in where the reinforcement, the force was already strong.
Yes.
For resting.
Yep.
And
And
made your cue basically a cue to keep resting.
yep. And
So
interestingly, I mean, I did, which is kind of a little bit of a we can get into because I knew food would be a potential problem for Otis. If I, um, started bopping, holding my heavy bag, my pretend baby, and gave a treat, now treats are part of the environment. And that for Otis, it's not like he is some dog who is jumping all over me. He's a dog who's very familiar with a training context. So he's still going to offer feet on floor, but I would no longer describe him as relaxed when food is in the environment. And some of the behaviors that I deem problems, meaning that they are rather interruptive in the life that we live in this house, can show up when the rate of reinforcement around food is not what the environment is sort of signaling it should be. If it drops too low, or if environment says food is available and it doesn't come when it should come, that is when you might get him standing up and giving you a quick little poke. And if it gets serious enough, we might even get a hump. And the thought of a 90-pound dog humping me while holding a baby was not great.
yeah,
So I felt like using food was going to actually introduce more problems for me. And so I went first with, where does this behavior already show up? And faded in sort of the new cues. And I did, in some ways, I had to be very intentional about it depending on what I was doing. So, like, I played around with how I did this. Like, I introduced, like, singing lullabies and stuff. 'Cause that's not, I don't usually sing lullabies. I did that in the
Make the
context.
whooshy sounds.
Yeah, like, I
Yep.
just, these are all weird sounds for a dog. And Otis is very, um, attuned to sounds and movements that I make, because anything that might signal play is available is meaningful for him. And so I introduced a lot of the sounds when he was resting on the couch and I was folding laundry on the floor, because that was a very familiar picture for him. And sort of eventually lost the laundry piece of it. Um, but I didn't use food. Um, and so I had to have a little bit of faith that whatever was already reinforcing those behaviors would continue to reinforce those behaviors. Um, I don't know. I guess kind of going back to a little bit how we use naturally occurring reinforcers. I think, like, I'm thinking about a couple of things that come to mind, and I'll sort of just throw them out there and see where it makes sense to go. Um, like, if I were going to use to maintain a behavior, I know one of the questions that um, Katie asked about, or one of the topics she brought up was, like, sort of more social reinforcers like petting, or um, if I was going to use that out in the world to maintain a behavior, and this is sort of a nod to Mary Hunter and Jesus Rosales Ruiz, is I'd want a really clear reinforcement system to use with that reinforcer. I don't know that I would just, like, randomly talk to them and hope, and pet them and hope that it would, like, I think I would teach them first. When I do this, that means you're going to get some pets, or and I would not start by using that out in the world. So I would teach that the same way I teach that get it equals I'm tossing a treat,
Mhm.
chase it. Um, and so I think that's one thing that comes to mind for me, is that when we use these other types of reinforcers, sometimes we're going to have to teach the reinforcement system. Um, and then the other one that came to mind for me is sniffing. And I use it a lot with reactive dogs, but I'm thinking a little bit about how I use this. Um, I have taught some dogs to go sniff on cue. And then, right, it's a cue, the same way that I would teach this equals come get pets, or putting
Mhm.
the same way that yes equals orient to me to see where my hands are going to deliver the treat. Go sniff becomes a cue, and you can point to whatever thing. Um, I find, though, that in order to use sniffing with with reactive dogs, and short of getting into continuously really novel, interesting environments that also are very far from a trigger, I'm going to have to give them something that makes them want to go sniff. Um, like, I'll set up a treasure hunt game, right? That sort of sets the stage for a bunch of sniffing, and we might be able to fade out the food from that picture, because what the dog has learned to do in the presence of a distraction that's really far away is to sniff. But I usually need something initially that is contrived there. uh,
Yeah. That's an interesting one, because I actually this is probably more of a reflection of, like, my skill than anything else, but I have not had a lot of success teaching dogs to sniff with, like, a food scatter.
well, I can't use food to teach it.
Yeah.
And
But
it's
I
also
know
maybe a
people
reflection of my own skill too. I have
yeah, I
learned
know
to.
people have, but I think
Yep.
it's like, snuffling around for food is a different behavior
Mhm.
than sniffing to get smells. So the way that I like to teach that. And I'm glad you brought it up because it's weird. Like, you just go through like phases where you teach something a lot and then like there'll be a year and you're really like, this hasn't come up at all.
Yes. Yes.
This thing that I thought I did all the time, like just hasn't been any occasion to use it. Um, uh, I will just when I'm approaching an area where the dog is likely to want to sniff. So, like, there's a tree there, or there's a clump of hostas there, or there's Pachysandra there, or whatever. I will just say, go sniff, and then I will walk into that area and kind of start to slow down and kind of meander around. And then the dog sniffs, and then they get whatever reinforcers exist there for sniffing. And I have been able to use that as like the dog saw another dog, and I use that sniff cue in place of a marker and wander and then walk off into whatever area is available. Um, so I think that's where
Yes.
you're probably going with that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when I used to be in the city with reactive dogs all the time, fire hydrants were my go-to. If we were approaching a fire hydrant, I was like,
Cliche. I know. Whenever a dog sniffs a fire hydrant, I'm like, you're such a cliche.
stop it.
Yeah.
Yes, but I just leaned right into that cliche and would say, go sniff and we would just walk towards the fire hydrant. And most of them picked that up very quickly. What I find to be like, Katie was asking about how you might use this, use a naturally occurring reinforcer when your dog isn't that into food around a trigger. And I think where I'm sort of trying to find a line or the way to kind of talk about this line is that sometimes depending on where we are in our, like if we are able to do some progression where we have taught that cue in sort of the way that Kiki was just describing, which is also the way that I have had the most luck teaching that. Sometimes if I use food, I actually teach the opposite of go sniff. I turn go sniff into this marker to look at me. And I'm like, nah, that's not what I wanted you to do. But if go sniff is a cue that you can actually use, right, that results in the dog going to sniff something, then you can use it exactly like Kiki described. But I think that in order to use it really systematically in working with reactivity, you have to do a ton of antecedent arrangement. Like you really got to arrange conditions because I think that is for some dogs, not all, that might be a really strong behavior and cue for some dogs. But I have found that like getting a dog to eat food when the trigger or distraction is a little bit closer than we want it to be, it tends to be a higher probability behavior than them saying go sniff. It's often they have a bigger history with eating food than they do. We might have just taught go sniff. And so I think there has to sometimes be a really systematic approach. If that is what you want to use to work around triggers, then I think you have to be very thoughtful about how you move that behavior go sniff from the conditions where it does show up into the conditions where you want it to show up, which is I see a trigger, I cue go sniff, and the dog does go sniff.
Yeah. Yeah. Which this also brings up these distinctions like naturally occurring and contrived are really about they're less about the stimuli involved than they are about what the trainer is doing, right? Because when we're doing what you're talking about, you're using what you would like to be the naturally occurring reinforcer as a contrived reinforcer because you're using it to teach, right? And so that brings us back to that question of how do you contrive it without like sort of putting in the dog in a situation where they really want something and they can't get it. And going back to your reference to Jesus and Mary, and lots of other students who've worked under Jesus, petting is an example of. So there's been a whole line of research under Jesus on using petting as a reinforcer, starting with Chase Owens's thesis from I think like I don't know, it's got like the mid 2010s or something, somewhere in there. Um, uh, the constructional affection work, which is using petting as a reinforcer.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal of that, I believe, was partially that, if you have guests coming over to your house, or you have normal people who don't have a bag of meat on their hip, like who adopt a dog or whatever, um, you want the dog to know how to get attention and affection from the person without doing unwanted behaviors and risking the people turning to punishment. But, not everybody wants to carry food. Food isn't always available. There's other reasons that you might not be using food. And I really think this is key with like dogs with greeting issues and things like that, or even stranger danger issues. Like, we want them to know how to get safe touching from a
Predictability.
human. And so the first thing that they did was they taught a system. In Chase's thesis, they taught a system where a hand movement sort of like this was like the click. It was the marker signal that said you're going to get petting. Um, and it was just taught basically by what I would call what is called response contingent pairing. So the dog does something, they have their feet on the ground. Then you pair this with um, the petting. And all of this goes way back to, the origins of the experimental analysis of behavior, where in a laboratory they've got a pigeon or a rat, or in a chamber
Mhm.
with levers or buttons or lights or whatever that they're going to be responding to
Mhm.
in an experiment. And the very first thing that they did, and this is described here for one place. This is Murray Sidman, who people might know for Coercion and its Fallout, but this is a book on how to do research. The first thing you do is you teach the animal um, where the food is going to come out. It's going to come out of this little hopper, um, when it's going to come out, and how to deal with it is what Murray Sidman says. So it's called magazine training, and they thought of it as operant. It wasn't like just pairing food and pairing the click that and the food comes out. It's like when you hear the hopper turn, go to the hopper, right? So when you hear go sniff, go put your nose in the grass. When you when you see this, you can start to move your body into the hands. You can put your butt in the way of the hands, or whatever to get. I've said butt like 3 times in this talk, but uh, you're teaching the dog what behavior to do when they hear the thing that says the reinforcer is coming, and how to consume the reinforcer.
Mhm.
And you need that. I won't say you need it, but it's ideal to have taught that as its own skill,
Yep.
before you take it into a place that has competing reinforcers and you want this thing to work as a reinforcer.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I also now rarely even take that how to access the reinforcer skill for granted. If I have only ever used a reinforcer uh, in my house, I'm going to go make sure that I can use it in whatever environment I intend to use it before I'm going to actually start using it as a reinforcer, right? I'm going to.
Yeah. Yeah. I've started to think of just everything is a chain.
Yep.
And I think that's what, that's how Jesus and Mary are talking about it in their reinforcement system stuff, that uh, that exchange is an interconnected chain where the trainer's behavior is a cue for the animal, and the animal's behavior is a cue for the human.
Mhm.
But even, going back to like what we've all learned, like the click is a conditioned reinforcer. Well, what's a conditioned reinforcer? So a learned reinforcer. Well, how is the click learned as a reinforcer? It's a cue to collect a
Yep.
treat, right? There's behavior between the click and the treat. So the click is just the last cue in your chain.
Mhm.
And what we know about chains is that if your cues are cruddy, if your behavior is not really under control by the cue,
Mhm.
and they don't know how to do the behavior, your chain is going to fall apart. It's going to crumble from there back. Um, so teaching those cues for how to get whatever the reinforcer is helpful, not just with a click and a treat, or not just with contrived reinforcers, but also with what you want to be the maintaining reinforcer in the natural setting.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I'm
and it might
trying.
be very powerfully reinforcing once they learn about it. Sort of going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the conversation about, like, getting scratched with the brush is, there's probably some primary reinforcement in that, like some tactile
Yeah, some sensory.
reinforcer, but they had to learn about how to collect that by, like, laying still, or, like, presenting your back or whatever to be
Mhm.
brushed.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and I think this. So I feel like we've kind of talked about. I'm trying to think if it's like sort of three different areas here. So one being, um, we know sort of what naturally occurring reinforcers are in the environment that are likely to maintain a behavior long term. So, for example, with walking, forward movement, access to smells. Um, but sometimes we need to, the dog does not have the skills to contact those reinforcers yet. Um, so we need some contrived reinforcer to help those skills so that those are the behaviors that actually contact those naturally occurring reinforcers. Then we and then sort of figuring out, like Kiki gave some examples of how do you handle the whole milk Pepsi piece, right? The or orange juice Pepsi, but I like your float. I do like the milk Pepsi now because of
I'm reclaiming the milk.
yeah, the float
Yeah.
really I think helps you there because like otherwise I think it's tough to have that conversation of what do you do if your dog now is like, hey,
Yeah.
where's my dang treat that you got me used to? Um, then there's this notion of um using like leaning into conditions where you already know that the desired behaviors are showing up, you've got the emotionality you want, they are being reinforced already by naturally occurring reinforcers. And how do you essentially fade in the other cues? Um, and I think, well,
Yeah, can we go back to that for 1 second?
yes.
So, all right. So one way to transition,
Mhm.
the way I have it thought of is like, you have like these decision points.
Mhm.
Do we transition from contrived reinforcement to the naturally occurring reinforcer, or do we teach with the naturally occurring reinforcer? And if so, how do we do that without
Sure.
introducing aversive, withholding
Yep.
kinds of situations? And what Christy keeps trying to get at is, um, and this comes from that constructional questionnaire from Israel Gold Diamond. There and the questions that you ask when you're like, what skill would make this better? What skill is missing? Um, and then you ask, does that skill exist somewhere else?
Fair.
Right? It doesn't exist in the situation where we need it, but is it happening somewhere else in the person or animal's life?
Mhm.
And if so, where?
Mhm.
So, what are the antecedents for it?
Mhm.
And what is maintaining it there?
Mhm.
Right? And then we can go capture it, honestly, just like we currently capture sit, right? If we want to teach sit, dogs sit anyway. They sit for other reasons, other times in their life, maybe not when people are coming in your door or wherever it is that you want them to sit. And I'm not saying the dogs should sit when people come in the door,
Just an
but
example. Yep.
right. But they so they sit, in the study with a candlestick. They sit here for to so they can see better,
Mhm.
so they can change their view, or they sit because their back legs are tired or whatever. And we go in and they sit and we go, here's a treat, right? And now they've learned, oh, this behavior I was doing for something else, I can do that to get a treat.
Mm.
And then we add a cue like sit that we can then take to other places to tell the dog that this is available here also, right? And then we might do a cue transfer where like now it's like, okay, when I hold up the leash, sit, and then you'll get a treat, right? And then we can also teach them, if I hold up the leash and you put your butt down, I will put your leash on and we will go out the door. It's really for other behaviors like laying down with your eyes half closed for Otis on the couch. We're really just sort of doing the same thing.
That's great.
Or for approaching a person to get petted is one that I've been thinking about a lot lately because I have come to feel that like laying on a mat for food is a little bit of a band-aid with a dog who is worried about strangers in the house, and that what we actually really want is for them to feel like those strangers are like members of the family, the type of people that they would like to get petting from,
Mhm.
right? They have that skill with if they have that skill, not all dogs do, but if they have that skill with their own humans,
Mhm.
right? How can I do that same process of capturing it, putting capturing the behavior of approaching
Mhm.
for petting, get it on a cue that then other people can offer to become part of this category of safe people. And don't go out and do anything based on that little bit of information,
Right.
but there are broader ways to think about this than just like obedience behaviors.
Yep.
And I think that's what you're
Yes.
getting
And
at, is how do we, if we can go find that behavior,
yes.
find where it exists
The
already,
conditions. Yep.
um, reinforce it with the naturally occurring reinforcer, but add a new cue that can be um, moved around.
Mhm.
So,
And so let's play it out in really quickly in an example. So like let's say that um let's pick a dog who does not eat fluently, right? So food is a tougher reinforcer, which you could go down a whole tangent with that, but let's just sort of leave that piece there. And um on a new trail, like a wooded trail or something, or a big open field with no other dogs around, they are going to walk or trot with fairly relaxed, low tension in their body. They're going to do a lot of sniffing. They'll give, some check ins. So those behaviors show up in that context. They disappear, let's say, in the city. Okay. So thoughts.
um, I don't know if I have enough,
I know that's very vague.
right?
Yes.
Um, you have to think about like what's cueing all those behaviors in the woods,
Hmm.
and is there anything there that you can replicate
Yes. This is
in the city? It might be the same. Well, for instance, with my dog, my previous dog, Pigeon, um, we discovered pretty late, I think, in her life that, she was like a different dog if you took her like for a long time we were afraid to take her hiking because of how she acted in the city. And I just should give context, like she's a dog I got before I was a trainer. Um, right. And so we avoided taking her hiking for a long time and then learned that she behaved
Totally different.
not totally differently, but like
Enough.
differently enough on a long line in the woods. And then I started walking her on a long line just in the city. And we don't live in like downtown New York or something, and we don't live in Manhattan. Like Chicago has like parkways and
Mhm.
parts of Chicago have, space. So I'm not saying like this universal for everybody, um, but walking her under some of the same conditions that she walked in the woods made her more likely to respond to things like she did in the woods.
Mhm.
Right? We still had to do some stuff um, to keep her from having a reaction, but even if she had a reaction, it was like less. And again, it's hard to parse out. Like we did everything. We tried, we did bat, we did
Mhm.
look at that, we did, so but I do think that this may be part of the reason that the decompression walks thing has been so valuable. Like it might be partially that like time in nature is good for everybody. Um, and you're letting dogs express their natural behaviors or whatever, but it may also be that there's learning occurring that
Sure.
then gets transferred to other conditions. And what are the cues for that behavior? Like the human's behavior, the equipment they're wearing.
Yep.
There are things that are transferable, and then there are things that are just fact of life in the city. You don't have the same
Right.
stuff on the side of the trail, or like I noticed that a lot of dogs, if you're on a sidewalk, they pull, or you're on a trail, they pull. If you're in a meadow, they look at you, right? Because on a trail or a sidewalk,
Yeah.
they know where you're going.
Yep. Mhm.
And in the meadow, they're not sure
Yep.
where we're going because there's not like a narrowed path. And so they like Finn, my dog will like look at me a lot more if we're in a meadow than he will if we're on a trail. On a trail, he's learned, he's already 8 when I got him. He's learned we're going where the trail goes. I don't need you. I don't need directions from you. Right. So if you can sort of observe uh, the conditions where behavior happens and where it doesn't happen, which if it doesn't happen, that means other behavior is happening, right? If you can start to pay attention to that stuff, you can look for things that are going to help you identify behaviors that you like that are happening under other conditions, what the conditions are, and whether you can replicate or transfer some of those conditions. So can I give a really simple example?
Yes, please.
Um, teaching, um, so like if you have a behavior that occurs, well, I kind of did give this example already. Like you have this behavior sit that occurs in this environment
Mhm.
and you add this word sit
Mhm.
that you can then move. But
Mhm.
like I've done similar things with like objects or sort of physical cues in the environment. Probably the one I've talked about the most is in my master's thesis. I was working with dogs who were barking um, almost incessantly as soon as someone sat down to talk on Zoom or have a snack. As soon as the person sat down to do these certain things, that was a cue for them to bark,
Mhm.
which gets at a whole other thing. Like for one of those dogs, just food being in the environment was the cue to bark. Actually, it wasn't the person sitting down to talk on Zoom. Um, and just removing the food from the antecedent environment completely got rid of the barking. But we decided to work with that person on not barking at her while she was eating
Yep.
instead. But we added a cue in the environment. I won't get into the whole thing here, but the cue to wait quietly was like a scarf over the back of the chair. And then we were able to take that scarf and move it to another room where eating also occurred. And the dog tried barking again for a little bit, but then was like, okay, like very quickly went to resting because barking was not going to be productive in the presence of the scarf.
Yes.
So you can think about cues not just as like things you say to your dog, but like as every piece of what's there in the environment is potentially a cue.
Right.
So again, like if you use like different gear on your dog. Oh, this is one. I had a client where they lived in an apartment building, and the door to their apartment building, there's a small landing, and then on the other side was another door, and there were dogs behind that door. And when she brought her dogs out into the landing, whether or not the other dogs even barked at the door, they would just go nuts, like at the other door. And those dogs were from previous training were walked on prong collars, and we were switching to a harness, but the person was very nervous about going out without the equipment that she felt like kept everything safe, and so I didn't have her change that right away. But what we did was we practiced with the harnesses, practiced putting the harnesses on, and then practiced doing training with harnesses on and leashes on in the house. So they learned different behavior under the conditions of having a harness on. They learned some new things. And this doesn't always happen, but the first day that we decided to go out on the harnesses, right? 2 dogs on harnesses, she opened the door and they just walked out and walked past the other door and down the stairs on the harnesses, probably looking for food. But so what they were wearing and what probably other things,
Cues,
whether there's a treat pouch or whatever, were part of the cue picture for barking and lunging at the other door, and those were gone, and they were replaced with cues that meant to do other behaviors to get food.
Yeah, I keep thinking about so I right now have been working with a lot of dogs who are fine out on the trails by my house, but when they send me videos in the city, it's night and day, and I keep trying to think about what could we get this behavior to attach to the behaviors and I care about the comfortable feelings, right? The dogs are much more comfortable when they're walking out here, and that I want that emotionality and those behaviors to attach to something that we can move. But I still don't know, like what you described, I think doesn't happen all the time. It's so cool to see it happen, but I feel like I'd probably have to come up with some more intentional way. I don't know that I could take it from out here and then just drop them back in the city. And
but maybe like you can transition to like streets near the woods and things like that. I think one thing that I wonder if it is overlooked, and I haven't had too much chance to like try it, is like a scent cue. Like,
interesting.
what if you like tied a little?
Yep. I know exactly where you're going with that. Yeah,
a little. Like I'm playing with this in my lap, like this, just a little piece of fabric. What if you soaked this with vanilla or whatever and tied it every time you go in the woods? You tied it to the thing because
it's a strong cue.
Yeah. And I posted about this on Facebook the other day. Like every time my dog gets back from the groomer, I have like flashbacks to being at the Miami Hills Swim Club in Milford, Ohio in the 80s. like, because whatever the groomer uses
Is
smells like
just like,
finesse. It smells like finesse shampoo.
oh my God.
Like if you remember finesse.
Yes, I
I think
do.
it still exists, but it probably is like way over scented now. But
Yes.
um and and then, dogs like smell even better than we do.
Sure.
And so how powerful, what is this powerful thing that we a lot of times we are overlooking because we're looking for when they see the other dog, or you know like, so I've often wondered if like adding a scent to walking in the woods
Mhm.
might help,
Well,
might be a transferable
maybe
thing.
I'll try it because what's funny is I have been noodling on ways to transfer those behaviors and those feelings, and I did not think of scent.
Well,
I'll
if you
start trying.
try it, you have to let me use video.
Okay. I will do that. I probably need to do a good job of collecting some data on this because it's just night and day. I had one dog in particular where it's just like I've literally struggled to not that I'm intentionally trying to reproduce problems, but I'm like, it looks great.
Yeah.
Which is great. That's what we want. We want conditions where looks great. This is great behavior. This is the emotionality we want. This is a very comfortable dog. This is not a dog who's like staring at me. He's very comfortable in his environment. I can hear my son screaming now, so I might have to end.
Okay.
But I is there anything that you wanted to do to kind of summarize or wrap up any of this?
um well, I one thing I might do is point people to
Please.
um I do have a talk on this that is available for a fee from Clicker Expo's video on demand
Mhm.
thing. It's linked on my website. So I'm sorry that it does cost money, but well, I'm not sorry. But
Oh, it's a great
yeah,
talk. People
uh so there's some video examples and things in there, and I'll probably talk about it again somewhere too, I hope. Like, as you know, like everybody wants new for their conferences, but like there's hundreds of people then that don't, you
get
know,
to yes.
get to see it. So Clicker Expo, they after a year they make the talks available individually for purchase, which I don't know how many people know that, but so it's like a webinar that you can buy. So I have a talk there called "Let the World Do the Work:
Mhm.
Transitioning to and Teaching with Naturally Occurring Reinforcers." Um, in that thing, I had kind of made a list of questions to kind of ask about when you're going to trans if you should you transition to or teach with the naturally occurring reinforcer. One is, does the dog have the skills to collect the reinforcer? Do they have the skills to get the opportunity to collect the reinforcer? Um, do they have the skills to enjoy the reinforcer that you want them to enjoy? So my example for that is I don't like I don't like card games or board games or things like that because I don't play them often enough to remember the rules, and so I'm always like limping along, like, right? And so if you want me to be able to contact the naturally occurring reinforcers for like sitting in on a poker game
Mhm.
or whatever, let's say you're a business person and you don't know how to play golf, right? Like, you're going to need to teach me how to the skills that I would need to be able to enjoy a card game, which might mean to win a card game once in a while. Um, what is the least aversive, stressful, or coercive way to teach the skills? Would it be easy enough to teach the dog from the beginning that if your feet are on the floor, you get petting? Or do we need to teach the dog? Is the dog going to experience a lot of frustration and extinction? Um, and would it be easier to teach them with treats and then teach them that they could get petting? Um, what are the antecedents going to be? Like what's going to, not just what's going to reinforce the behaviors, but what is going to cue the behaviors, in what cues them in the old environment, and then what is going to be available to cue them in the new environment, because it won't happen if the cue doesn't happen. And then how are you going to avoid or navigate that milk Pepsi moment?
You make a float. I'm so glad
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's probably going to be for.
I mean, sometimes it's not that bad. Like one time.
Right. Sometimes they're like, oh, this works too.
Yeah. So, but like where it gets tricky, like, if it's like, okay, I got a treat and now you're going to open the door, probably just do it.
Right.
Right. And after the first time, they're like, okay. But if you're going to transition from using food with a dog who is nervous about, like, you're going to transition from food to petting with a dog who's nervous about new people, like you don't want that one aversive time where you reach for them when they're expecting food, you could get bit. So you need to think about how you're gonna make it clear what reinforcers are available,
right,
and let the dog choose to come in for petting versus just like laying the petting on them.
Yes. Well,
Things like that.
Ambiguity in general can poison the cues, and then you've created a whole bunch, whole other topic.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Kiki, it's always a treat to get to talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for doing this. There's so much good information. And then is your loose leash walking class full?
Oh yeah, I have a whole bunch of stuff to promote, I guess.
Yeah, tell us.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Uh,
So I have a loose leash walking course enrolling until August 27th with Clicker at clickertraining.com. It's a 5-week course, and it actually gets into a fair bit of this stuff about how to teach the dog to get forward movement as a reinforcer, and I think I talk about sniffing and how to teach loose leash walking with contrived reinforcers and transition to naturally occurring reinforcers is kind of a big sub topic in that class. So, and you can join that at 2 levels. There's like a level that has coaching, and then there's a level that's like more like auditing, that's less expensive. And then I also am going to talk about loose leash walking at a couple of other places. So one is Sarah Matter's trainers retreat in September in Vermont, where you can go. And I'm just going to talk. I'm not going to be doing any coaching. But one of the nice things about that retreat is that it's a farm. There's farm animals that we'll do training with if you go in person, but there's also an online version where you can just get the people who are talking, and it's all people who have a background in behavior analysis and are using it with animal training. So Maya Owen and who else is presenting? Mary Hunter. I'm blanking a little bit on it, but
it's a good group.
Yeah, and then at Clicker Expo, I'm going to be talking about rethinking some of these, which is in March in New York. I'm going to be talking about loose leash walking and also teaching a loose leash walking lab there that you can sign up for or attend. And I'm also going to be talking about some of these concepts that we touched on a tiny bit today about, like, what is the click doing and what is a conditioned reinforcer anyway, and other things that are kind of like maybe a little bit gospel-y at this point that I want to question and poke at a little bit. So
I love it. I love poking.
So those are my upcoming
things. Your upcoming things. Well,
yeah.
I'm so glad that more people will just have more access to you, because it's a treat to learn from you.
Get sick of me.
No, never.
I'll have nothing to do next year.
Never. Okay, well, thank you, Kiki. I really appreciate it. I will get this sent out hopefully later today.
All right. And thanks to
bye.
The folks who are here too. Hi.
All righty. Bye. Talk to you later.